And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Hedrick Smith is with us. He is the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter, PBS producer, Emmy Award-winning PBS producer, author of several books, including the latest, Who Stole the American Dream? And he put together a website, reclaimtheamericandream.org, that I'm looking at as we speak. It's quite impressive. And Hedrick Smith, welcome back.
It's great to see you again, Tom.
Great to have you with us.
Yeah.
Who stole the American dream?
Basically, it was the wealthy. But it was capturing government. It was really triggered by a guy that most of us tend to forget, a guy who served on the Supreme Court, a famous a lawyer named Lewis Powell, who said back in 1971, before Nixon put him on the Supreme Court, to his buddies at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, hey, you're getting killed in the political arena. You should organize. You should pool your money. You should go after your enemies. You should take the high ground. You should move your offices to Washington. It's astonishing. I couldn't believe it, Tom. I didn't know anything about this, nor did anybody in my bureau at the time. Late 70s, 65 people working for me in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. None of us knew anything about the Powell Memo. 3 months after the Powell Memo gets circulated secretly by the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable is formed. 200 biggest corporations in America who lobby the president, the vice president, and so forth.
And John Snow, who was the Secretary of Treasury or Commerce under Bush, was the CEO of the Business Roundtable.
Yeah. There were 175 companies that had offices in Washington when Powell wrote his memo. 8 years later, before Reagan was elected, 2,425. Unbelievable. 9,000 registered corporate lobbyists, 50,000 people working for business trade associations. That all hit Washington while Carter was president, while the Democrats had Congress. And the pivot, the change, the watershed in American politics, to my surprise and the surprise of a lot of other people, actually occurred with the Democrats in charge. You get the 401k plan, you get the rewriting of corporate bankruptcy laws, you get the reduction of the capital gains tax, you get deregulation, you get a whole lot of stuff started. Reagan accelerates it, drives it like crazy, but it actually happened under the Democrats. It's an amazing story.
A lot of it truly is. And a lot of those things happened in the last 2 years of the Carter administration, which corresponded with Maggie Thatcher being elected, 2 years into the Carter administration. And her Thatcherism, the first thing she did was bust the unions, the coal miners' unions, and her famous statement, "There's no such thing as society. There's only a collection of individuals." And this kind of libertarian ideology, Milton Friedmanism, it became acceptable in the United States, as a consequence.
What also happened was there were a whole lot of Democrats elected after Watergate in 76 and 78. In previously Republican or very tippy districts, and they were all scared they were going to get cleaned out when Reagan started to run, so they began to shift their politics in the 78, 79, 80 period.
To the corporate side.
To the corporate side. So you had an anti-Congress, you had an anti-business Congress in the early 1970s and a pro-business Congress at the very end of the 1970s. A real pivot takes place.
Right.
And tremendous impact on us today. I mean, we still have the same power setup today that we had back starting in the late 70s.
So I use the Reagan Revolution as shorthand to describe that era, but we could describe it really as the Lewis Powell Revolution because he was the guy behind, arguably the guy behind it. And he was the guy who also...
He's the guy who articulated it. I mean, we don't overdo how influential he was. I mean, he wrote something that fell on very fertile ground. I mean, a lot of business leaders were very frustrated with Ralph Nader and the environmental movement, with the women's movement, with the consumer movement, with the labor movement. So they were ready to hear this message.
Well, and in the Powell Memo, Lewis Powell opens the Powell Memo talking about Rachel Carlson and Ralph Nader and how they are creating consumer movements that are going to take down business if business doesn't get its act together. I'm totally with you. But then in 1976, Powell's on the Supreme Court, and he is the lead author of the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, where for the first time in American history, the Supreme Court said that what previously had always been considered a behavior, which is the spending of money, was actually protected by the First Amendment as political speech. And that paved the way to Citizens United. It began the corruption of the American... I mean, it was already arguably in many ways corrupt, but that was... It seems to me that was a major pivot point as well.
Well, there's no question. And the court, in the Powell era, if we take this whole era since Lewis Powell joined the court, has rendered an overwhelming majority of decisions on behalf of business, against consumers, and against labor. It's happened again and again.
A year after Buckley in First National Bank versus Bellotti, they did the same thing. They said to Frank Bellotti, what do you call it? The chief law enforcement officer for Massachusetts, the attorney general, He had sued the First National Bank of Boston because there was a law in the books in Massachusetts that said corporations can't engage in electioneering unless it directly affects their business. And they were putting money into something that had to do with abortion, as I recall, or whatever. And you know, in First National Bank, again, Lewis Powell says this First Amendment right of speech that we discovered in Buckley last year, we're extending this to corporations.
And what's interesting is Americans don't realize this. Corporate money was banned from American political campaigns in 1907.
Right.
So for
The Tillman
nearly
Act.
7 decades.
Yeah.
For nearly 7 decades, it was illegal, and it all gets turned around in this recent era. And it's now become so much not only the law of the land, it's become the air we breathe in our political campaigns. We just take it for granted it was always this way, but it wasn't.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it was Teddy Roosevelt who pushed the Tillman Act through in 1907, as I recall.
Or Howard Taft. But
Was
was
Taft the president then?
At that point, yeah.
Okay.
But in any case, same bunch of guys who were doing it. Yeah, the progressive Republicans were doing it. And the reason I think this is important to know is not just to know history, but to understand that American politics have changed in one direction, and we can go change them back in the other direction. I mean, I think there's a sense of futility and despair among a lot of people who are upset with the current trends, with the court decisions, with the way Congress is behaving, with the gridlock in Washington, and they sort of throw up their arms and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Well, in fact, human beings push politics in this way, and human beings can go push politics and reform back the other way.
The thing that I think Americans don't get, and they did get before the Reagan era, I believe, I certainly learned this in civics class as a kid in the 50s, was that business is essentially a game, and there are rules to the game. And the first rule of the game is business has to be conducted in a way that benefits society. Second rule of the game is make as much money as you can. And that these guys who run around talking about the free market, they would never talk about a free football game. You know, no rules, no referees, whatever team has the most money gets to decide where the goalposts are. I mean, but they want business to be like that. How do we re-inform Americans that business operates on a playing field that is designed and controlled by we the people, by our government, and it should be for the benefit of the people rather than exclusively the benefit of the corporations?
Well, we're actually doing it. I mean, one of the interesting things that's happening is just take the minimum wage, which is a fairly important rule of the game, right? It's one of the rules of the game. You got to play that way.
Yeah.
Well, all through the post-war period, both Republicans and Democrats voted to raise the minimum wage to make sure that the middle class and the lower middle class, the working class, took part in the prosperity and the growth of the American economy. And then really, again, starting in that same period, late 70s and early 80s, particularly with Reagan. Reagan was the first president who, for 8 years, stood against raising the minimum wage. But it's now happening. We have deadlock here in Washington, and we have 28 states in the country that have higher wages than the federal minimum wage. Right. Los Angeles, just last week, voted to increase its minimum wage to $15. So that's how you actually do it. I think talking about it doesn't work. I think you actually have to go see it. And that's why I tried to create a web page that took people to practical examples of what is happening in America. There's more change going on than the mainstream media is telling people about. There's more change going on than even people who are upset and want change know. And I think it's critical. People would be encouraged to take part in pushing for solutions on student debt, on corporate taxes, on getting dark money out of politics, on rolling back Citizens United, on giving multiple matches to people who are small donors in campaigns. Those things are happening in America, but most Americans don't know they're happening or where they're happening.
The website is reclaimtheamericandream.org. The book, Who Stole the American Dream? Our guest, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times journalist and Emmy Award-winning producer Hedrick Smith. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hedrick's website, reclaimtheamericandream.org. We'll be right back. There you go. Welcome back. Hedrick Smith is with us, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times journalist, producer, Emmy Award-winning producer. I've gone through the ReclaimTheAmericanDream.org is the website. So what is the state of the American economy right now, Hedrick Smith?
Well, the state of the American economy is really poor. I mean, we've had a period of growth, but it's poor in the sense that it's not delivering for most people. I mean, you keep having the president and others get up and say, we've got so many months of growth. We've added 11, 12 million jobs. But at the same time, we have the median household income is lower today than it was in 1999. Well, when I read progress reports and I looked at graphs, I made sure I got to do it right way for your viewers, but they go up this way, right?
Right.
They don't go down this way. So you got growth going up this way, you got family income going that way. Something's really wrong. And what's really wrong is that the pay is being concentrated, the rewards are being concentrated at the top, and they're just astonishing. You can go practically anywhere and find figures. The ones I saw just the other day, we're talking about fast food industry. Average CEO pay $23 million or something like that in the fast food industry, which is more than 400 times the average household income in America. Right. So these CEOs are making 400 times. If you go back to the heyday of the middle class, Charlie Wilson at General Motors, Rick Jones at General Electric, Frank Abrams at Standard Oil in New Jersey, they made 40 times what the average worker made.
Lee Iacocca took a $1
shouting
salary.
Distance. Yeah, you have to add another. I mean, that's what's wrong with the American economy. And when we generate jobs, we're not generating good jobs. I mean, you have people, I've talked to them, you've profiled them, I've profiled them, I've met them. The stories are terrible. You meet a guy who worked in a television tube plant in Circleville, Ohio, and he was making $18, $20, and he got so good at it, he became a quality inspector. He was the guy who was determining that their goods were good enough to go out the door.
Right.
Plant shuts down. He's working as a greeter at Walmart and doing Walmart stuff at $8, $8.50, $9 an hour if he's lucky. Right. So he's had his pay cut in half. If you count the jobs, there's one job for one job. But if you count the income and the standard of living, that's what's wrong.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is that old-time American capitalists understood what made the American economy work. If you go to a guy like Henry Ford, a century ago, he doubles the pay of Ford workers to $5 a day, which doesn't sound like much today, but it was really big pay. And he says, if I pay them that, not only will they stay on the payroll, not only is it fair, but they'll be able to afford to buy the Model T cars we're making. Right. And that's what Charlie Wilson and those other guys said in the 50s, 60s, 70s. If we pay tens of millions of Americans a decent wage, they'll
buy our products.
They'll buy our products. The economy will boom. If you're looking at a weak economy, it's suffering from two things. It's suffering from insufficient purchasing power. That means the middle class isn't making enough. And the corporations are spending so much money on stock buybacks and dividends to shareholders that they're not investing in their own growth. And I mean, if a guy like Larry Fink, who's head of BlackRock, biggest investment company on Wall Street, $4 trillion. He writes a letter to 500 CEOs and says, hey, you're giving too much money to stockholders. You shouldn't be doing that with your profits. You should be investing them in your own growth and worker training and quality workers and R&D and expanding it.
There's a guy who's not going to get invited to the Christmas parties.
The answer is that people at the top, but it's interesting, people at the very top
they're figuring it out.
Understand what's going on.
But Warren
here.
Buffett's been singing this song for some time.
But Warren Buffett is an investor. Well, maybe Larry Fink's an investor too. So maybe the real big investors do get it. It's the guys who are running the companies who say, well, I'm only here for 3 or 4 years. I'm cashing in.
There you go. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We are talking with New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and Emmy-winning PBS producer Hedrick Smith, author of several books, including his latest Who Stole the American Dream and the new website, ReclaimTheAmericanDream.org. And, good, and plus HedrickSmith.com for your personal website, I guess.
Yeah.
So we've defined the problem, essentially, and the problem is, or let me lay this out, and you can fact check me on this, that capitalism crashed in the 20s, the late 20s. FDR put it back together and came up with a set of rules. There was a lot of trial and error. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. Right. But eventually we ended up with a set of rules for capitalism that essentially saved capitalism. FDR was walking down that middle path between literally fascists in the United States and communists in the United States, who both had credibility because we hadn't seen the horrors of either of those systems until, after World War II. He saved capitalism from itself. We subsisted, we thrived, the middle class, for the next 40, 50 years.
And the country thrived.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The middle class and the United States. Yeah, absolutely. We became the largest industrial power in the world. I mean, we just, and it wasn't because the rest of the world was devastated. It was because we had figured out a way to make this work. And then Powellism, Reaganism, whatever you want to call it, around 1980, everything changed. There was literally a revolution in the way we thought and in the way we conduct business and the rules of the game. And now we need a counter-revolution, it seems to me. I was rereading the 1956 Republican Party platform that Dwight Eisenhower ran on re-election for. In the platform, we added 1 million people to Social Security. We expanded Social Security. We expanded Social Security disability. We added over 2 million unionized employees. 2 million more people joined unions. We took down barriers, racial barriers in the workplace. We raised the minimum wage. This is Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican running for president, on Bernie Sanders' platform. I mean, I couldn't find.
Well, by the way, Richard Nixon carried it right on. Richard Nixon governed as president, a Republican president, far to the left of Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and Barack Obama. No question about it. I mean, he had a progressive tax program that he did. He added people to the Social Security rolls. He closed loopholes on the wealthy.
He proposed Obamacare.
Absolutely. And he set up the Environmental Protection Agency, set up OSHA, set up the National Traffic Highway Safety Administration. In fact, part of the Powell Memo we were talking about before is basically railing against the rules of the game that you were talking about that were established by the Nixon administration. He never uses Nixon's name, but he's ranting against the rules of the game that Nixon wasn't trying to hurt capitalism. Nixon was trying to save it. Yeah. He said it's got to be transparent. It's got to be open. There got to be rules of the road. It's like the highway. It's like soccer should be. It's like football, baseball.
There's a book, and I think I've got a copy of it on my shelves here, that basically suggests that Nixon was set up by big business interests who didn't like the way that he was running the country. That he was already a crook and he was predisposed, but he wasn't the first president for that to be the case. And that they wanted him out of office. They got him out of office. That's a bridge too far? I think.
I think that's a bridge too far.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, but what's important is what you were talking about before, and that is we changed the rules.
Right.
Starting in the late 70s, we changed the rules. We went from lifetime pensions to 401k plans that moved hundreds of billions of dollars out of the cost books of the companies into the checkbooks of individuals. When I called my book, Who Stole the American Dream, that's the first theft. The whole way the banks handled the mortgage crisis was the next big step. And that all got passed. The rules of the mortgage game, the ability to take 100% loans, no limit on interest rates, all the rules that became very important in the 2000 housing boom and bust were all written in the late 70s and early 80s. The stuff all changed right there. So you're right. I mean, if we want a country to have an economy that works for everybody, people at the top, people in the middle, people at the bottom, much better than it does today, we got to go back and reinstitute some of those rules. I mean, the Glass-Steagall Act was protecting us from bank excesses. Yeah. And who got rid of it? I mean, Bill Clinton and Bob
and Phil
Rubin
Graham.
and Phil Graham and Alan Greenspan.
Yeah.
I mean, they went and said banks want to be able to play anywhere they play in the field.
Yeah.
And let Paul Volcker come along and say, well, let's put a limit on the gambling they can do with our deposits.
Right.
And Congress is having a fit. The banks are having a fit. They finally get that written in, but they can't get the rules written. I mean, we need, you're absolutely right. The rules of the road need to be clear and they need to be fair for everybody. And they aren't at the moment.
And they're not. And I'm not hearing, with the single exception of Bernie Sanders, I'm not hearing any national political figures have this conversation. Are you?
Oh, I think Elizabeth Warren certainly is.
Oh, yeah.
Elizabeth Warren certainly is. You know,
let me rephrase that. I'm not hearing any candidates for president having this conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, the presidential campaign is striking for its lack of substance.
Yes.
I mean, but come on. I mean, it is, what is it, almost 18 months or 15, 16 months? It shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be having a campaign at this point. One of the lunacies of American politics is that we have a campaign that is now engaging the energies and the interests of the media instead of watching why the government isn't doing our business.
Right.
Our attention in the media should be on why the heck Washington isn't doing anything and how things are happening in Los Angeles or in Washington State or in Connecticut or around the country. We're not paying attention to that. We're so fascinated with the personality game, we're not interested in the substance of what's happening to policy.
And some of that goes back to Reagan, too, in 1987, suspending the Fairness Doctrine. So no longer did news agencies have to actually produce news. They could switch over to infotainment, which they did. CBS the next year moved their news division into their entertainment division.
I'm with you on that, but I also think that most political reporters are sports reporters in the field of politics. They want to know who's up, who's down, what the score is, who's got a nice move to the left, to the right, who's got what polling figures look, what's the scouting report. I mean, this is not about government. This is about a political game. And I think we in the media are really, we're not doing a good job of informing people. In my opinion, I don't know about you, but I think we missed the biggest story of 30 years, which is who stole the American dream. We didn't even pay attention to it until Occupy Wall Street. Inequality of income. Yes, were there stories about it? But was there an understanding of it? No, not until somebody said, hey, 1%, 99%. And that actually began to dent people's consciousness.
Yeah.
So people who say that movement didn't succeed, I think are right in terms of policy. But they're not right in terms of the mindset.
We'll be right back with Hedrick Smith. The website.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
The website, reclaimtheamericandream.org. The book, Who Stole the American Dream. We'll be right back. You can stay. Welcome back. 28 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Hedrick Smith is with us in the studio. The Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times journalist, PBS Emmy award-winning producer. It's pretty cool stuff. Author of several books, including Who Stole the American Dream, the website reclaimtheamericandream.org. Hedrick, we've I think done a pretty reasonable job of describing what happened and when it happened, and that it needs to change. You said that you created this website, reclaimtheamericandream.org, because you wanted to give people hope and optimism. What are the things that you see happening? You mentioned, the minimum wage going up in Los Angeles, for example. What are the things that you see happening that people can actually jump into? Where are the access or entry points for people who want to help roll back the Reagan Revolution or reclaim the American dream, or however you want to paraphrase it?
Right.
Where are the, what can the people who are watching or listening to this program do right now? I'm
glad you asked that question, because I got asked that question everywhere I went. I've given over 100 speeches in the last year or so around the country. There are a whole bunch of them, and I'm trying to assemble them on the page. I haven't got them all there, but I got a bunch of them there. Right now, in the state of New Hampshire, there's a battle over whether or not they're going to ratify in the state legislature a resolution calling for the rollback of Citizens United, a constitutional amendment. There are 69 towns in the state of New Hampshire that have passed resolutions. These were individual towns where people had to circulate petitions, so that's very close to home, right? Mm-hmm. You circulate petitions, you take it to the town council or the town meeting, they put it on the agenda, and there's a town vote. 69 different places in New Hampshire have done that. Now they've gone to the legislature and say to do that. In the state of Washington, on exactly the opposite side of the country, Washington Amend and Fix Democracy First are two organizations that are now gearing up to try to put the issue of a constitutional amendment to roll back Citizens United on the ballot in 2016. Right. That happened in Colorado 3 years ago in 2012, and the vote was unbelievable. The vote was 73% in favor of a constitutional amendment. It carried every single county in the state of Colorado, all the red counties as well as the purple counties and the blue counties. So it was across the board, regardless of politics. The people in office, you can see Democrats going for reform, Republicans tending to resist it, certainly at the federal level. At the state level, more mixed picture. But at the grassroots, you don't have that. So that's an issue on which you can get directly engaged. Right. Okay, and that's happening around the country. I just gave you two states. The Los Angeles decision to raise the minimum wage didn't come out of nowhere. There's a thing called LANE, I think it's the Los Angeles Association for a New Economy, and they are talking about rules for a new economy, just as we were. They put a lot of pressure on the city council. They put a lot of pressure on the mayor. There were a bunch of votes. In fact, I think the city council in Los Angeles first said it would raise the minimum wage of hotel workers because there are a lot of conventions that come to Los Angeles, and they figured the hotels, the big hotels, could afford that. So that was the result of citizen pressure. But my favorite story is the story of SeaTac. Seattle, Tacoma have a combined airport. It's called SeaTac. There's a town around the airport called SeaTac, 21,000 people. Most of them in recent years have come from Ethiopia, Somalia, Bosnia, Ukraine, Russia, not countries with a lot of experience in American grassroots politics. The trade unions out there, the Teamsters Union, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, SEIU, Service Employees International Union, they all tried to organize the workers, set up unions at the airport to try to represent the fuelers, the baggage handlers, the people who wheel the wheelchairs around, the people who clean the cabins, the people who drive the rental cars around, gas them up, service them, and that kind of stuff. They couldn't get that done. There are problems in the law. The way the law is written in the Railroad Act affects it, makes it hard. So they decided to try politics. They decided to try to put it to a vote in the town of SeaTac. Now, these are people who had no experience, a lot of them, no experience in American politics. They got organized. The churches, the mosques, the community groups, Puget Sound Safe, which is a research organization, the 4 unions that I mentioned, a bunch of other people got together. And in the last 2 months before the election, they registered 1,000 new voters. They won the vote for a $15 minimum wage by 70 votes. That is grassroots action of people coming together on that issue. At the same time, you probably remember reporting on this, at the same time that North Dakota and Alaska and Arkansas were electing Republican senators in last fall's election, they were passing citizens' referendums to raise the minimum wage. Those were things that were put on the ballot through the petition process, and then you had to get out there and vote. Those are things that people can do and, in fact, are doing across America. And I think it's terribly important for people in Illinois and Connecticut and Nebraska and Oklahoma and Florida. In 2010, Florida passed a referendum to amend the Florida Constitution to ban the partisan gerrymandering of congressional and legislative districts. Unbelievable. Florida, I mean, Florida is not exactly your blue state that you would expect to go for that. Now, the wording of it wasn't tight enough, but it was good enough for there to be a lawsuit in the last election saying that the state legislature had gerrymandered the districts, and a judge ordered the state legislature to redo it. They're going to keep fighting that because it wasn't tough enough. My point is that even in places where you would think it wouldn't happen, Arizona has public financing of political campaigns. Yeah. Like Minnesota, like Connecticut, like Maine. 25 states have some kind of public financing of campaigns to try to, and particularly in the case of judges, to try to insulate them from raising money from big financial interests that have an interest before the courts. My point is I can go to one issue after another. There's now a huge battle going on across the country in one state after another about student debt. What do you do about student debt? Is there something we should do? Should we raise taxes? How do we hold tuition down? Should there be more state appropriation?
Should we have free college?
Should we have free college? Bernie Sanders is talking about that. But Tennessee, Republican Governor Bill Haslam innovated a program for free community college tuition in Tennessee. Now, that doesn't cover all the costs, but that's a conservative Republican governor, conservative Republican legislature, and they're moving on that. My point is that if you start to look at what's happening, to me, I begin to ask the question, are we at the beginnings of a new progressive era in this country where not only these things are happening, but they're happening out there?
I believe
Washington is stalemated.
Yeah.
And the states and the cities are starting to take the initiative. I think it's encouraging. I think it's a terrific story as a journalist. As a citizen, I'm really interested. But I don't see the mainstream media paying much attention to it at all.
No. And the extent to which these kind of things are going to get attention paid to them is probably going to be in the Democratic debates when Bernie Sanders gets in there. I mean,
Yeah, but you're back to the presidential election.
I know.
But
But see, that's the shiny thing that the media is paying attention to.
you're right.
And so right now, if you want to get a message through, that's pretty much the vehicle you've got to use.
Okay, but you asked me the question of how people can get involved, and my answer to them is don't pay a lot of attention to that. In the first place, it's practically a year early.
Yeah.
We're maybe not a year early, but we're 6 to 8 months anyway early on the presidential thing. And it's not going to get substantive and serious for another 6 months.
But these things are all
months.
happening independent of any of this.
So what you need to do is put your time, your energy, your attention, and your thoughts and your organizing skills and getting together with your neighbors at your state and local level. Tallahassee. There's a new group called Represent Us. They've come up with almost a formula, a menu for how to do local reform, how to get your lobbyists out of paying money to your city council. This is not to Congress. This is not to the legislature. It's to your own city council, right? How to get dark money out in the open and so forth. They put a package together. It got passed in Tallahassee in the last election. Tallahassee is not one of your most liberal cities in the country, although it is a blue county, that area. And they're now going after 15 other states, 15 other cities, and 3 states around the country. So there are things people can do to start to clean up. And if we start to clean up at the bottom, it's going to start to change politicians. Politicians pay attention when things get done.
You're describing in some ways Ralph Nader's next to the last book was called Unstoppable.
Right.
And it was 27, as I recall, issues on which typical Tea Party Republicans and typical progressive liberal Democrats agree.
Right.
Let's expand Social Security rather than contract it. Let's lift the cap and let rich people pay. Let's increase the minimum wage. The minimum wage may not be. I don't remember the list, but
they were certainly on it because I've talked to Nader and he's big on that.
Yeah. And basically what he was saying is that we're entering this populist era where it's not left or right anymore. It's bottom
little
top.
versus big.
Yeah, little versus big.
Little versus big. Little people versus big corporations, big money. Big, yeah.
And
absolutely.
people are getting it. The big corporations are sick and twisted and damaging our economy, because of the way that they're being run. But back to the rules of the game, that we've got to change the rules of the game. So
I talked to one of the guys who was involved in the campaign against Eric Cantor.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a Tea Party Republican political strategist.
Right.
And he is now hell-bent for leather to get matching funds or tax credits or some kind of tax write-offs for small donors. He said, we come in here and we're opposing Eric Cantor. He's the candidate of the big corporations. He can raise $5 million. I mean, it's remarkable that the other guy, what's his name, Blatt, won the race.
Right.
But his campaign manager says, we've got to change the system. Even though they won, he said, because when I used to ask people to give me $100, they said, I can't afford it. Can you give me a tax write-off? Can I get a tax credit for this? Is there something that helps me as a small donor? He said, we had a hell of a time raising money. And so, again, it is little people on both sides.
Yeah. I got to tell you what Republicans have said to me in private. We'll do that right after the break. We'll be right back. Hedrick Smith is with us. ReclaimTheAmericanDream.org is the website. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
ReclaimTheAmericanDream.org is the website. We'll be right back with more of Hedrick Smith. Welcome back. Hedrick Smith still with us.
You're talking about Republicans.
Right. I've had this conversation with a number, not a large number, but a not inconsequential number of elected Republican officials who will not talk about this on the air. But, they come in here, they debate me or come on the TV show and debate me or whatever, and we'll argue about minimum wage all day long. When you ask them, what do you think about getting money out of politics? What do you think about reversing Citizens United? With the exception, now I've never asked Darrell Issa, who's the richest Republican in the House and probably one of the only ones with a criminal history as well. But he can afford, he's got $700 million. He can, he doesn't care about money in politics. But most of these guys, both Republicans and Democrats, will tell you right straight up, I am sick and tired of spending 60% of my time begging for money.
They hate it.
And now in the Republican presidential race, basically, if you don't have a billionaire, Marco Rubio, it turns out, I've just read this in the New York Times last week, his entire political career is the result of a relationship with one billionaire.
Yeah,
he's got one billionaire, so he's a viable candidate. And, it's like, who has a billionaire? These are the, if you don't have a billionaire, you're not a viable candidate for president. This is just like, this is nuts. And the elected officials are starting to get sick of it. And that's what gives me a lot of hope for the move to amend.org kind of stuff, to amend the Constitution.
You don't know what the tipping point will be. My experience, you've had these conversations with people who are still in office. I've had more conversations with people who've left office. I mean, I'm talking about people like Alan Simpson, senator from Wyoming, very prominent Republican. He's on board, for getting rid of the crazy fundraising and for public financing of campaigns and that kind of stuff. I mean, and a whole lot of other people. There are very few people in Congress that will say that publicly. There's one conservative from North Carolina who has said that. But there are a lot of people who say, I've talked to both sides, say, this is sickening. It's corrupting, not only corrupting the process, it's keeping us from doing business. We don't even have enough time to do the business because we're spending so much of our time on the damn phone every day.
Right.
I mean, I think Fritz Holling said to me, a former senator from South Carolina, said to me when he first won a Senate seat in the late 60s, a Senate seat then there was a limit on spending in the late 70s. And I think he said he spent $800,000. He said now it's $8 million. And he said, that means I got to raise $18,000 every day. Right. When you put it down to that, you suddenly realize this is a lodestone on these guys' legs. They can hardly walk. They can hardly they can hardly afford to spend any time in their office, let alone the floor of the committee room.
Unless they have sold out to a billionaire or they happen to be independently wealthy. And that's not democracy. That's oligarchy.
Yeah, but you're talking there about super PACs, and that's the rival of super PACs. I mean, most of these guys have lived through the period where they had to solicit donations to themselves in their own campaign. Right. And there were limits on that. $2,000, $4,000, $5,000, $5,600, that kind of thing.
Scott Walker just came out and said if you give $1 million to a super PAC, then you're guaranteed 2 in-person meetings a year with him. I've got the whole list
someplace.
Right? Yeah. It just came out. There's like this 12-point bonus package that you get if you give $1 million. If you give $500,000, you get 1 personal visit with him per year. And if you give less than $500,000, forget it.
Yeah, forget it.
You
can wave at him from a distance.
Exactly.
Right?
You get your name inscribed in the menu.
I've got to tell you that.
Hold that thought because we've got to hit a break here. It is 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with Hedrick Smith. Stick around. Back. Hedrick Smith is in the studio with us, and the website reclaimtheamericandream.org, the book Who Stole the American Dream. And Hedrick, we've got about 8 minutes here to wrap this up.
Well, a couple of things just to say quickly on the site. Dark money.
Yeah.
Dark money, which is money we can't trace. Right. In the 2006 election, this is all information that's on the site. In the 2006 election, amounted to $5.2 million. In 2012, it was over $300 million. It's going way over $500 million. This is absolutely dark money. Right. Super PAC money is exploded. I think during my travels, the most astonishing headline I read was in the USA Today, and the headline, the banner across the whole paper was Koch brothers to play kingmakers. And the story then went on to say that they were putting $300 million. They were putting $300 million into the presidential campaign, and they intended to back 5 Republican candidates. Well, that says, that's who's in the semifinals. And we're back to Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed said, I don't care who you vote for, just as long as I get to nominate him. Right? So, this is where we are. I mean, it's very interesting. People don't react quite the same way, but we're back to a modern version of smoke-filled rooms.
Yeah.
The whole idea that there were people who could gather in a secret room and decide who the heck was going to be the candidate of the party, we're back to that. It's just being done now through super PACs. It's being done electronically in the way people raise money. And it's the same game as Mark Hanna played back in the 1890s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Mark Hanna was the Karl
kingmaker.
Rove of...
He was the Koch brothers and the Karl Rove rolled together.
Yeah.
And a senator on top of it.
There you go. Yeah. Wow, I was going to go someplace with that, and just remembering Mark Hanna. Oh my God. Another completely different question. What do you expect is going to be happening with our economy over the next couple of years, and what political consequence will that have if it continues to inflate, or if it crashes, or if we just go into a long period of stagnation?
Well, I'm not an economic expert. I'm a reporter who listens to other people who are pretty good. And I can't believe that we're not going to have another kind of financial collapse as we did in 2007 and 2008, because the people who really understand how finance works say the problems we had then have not been fixed. Right. The too big to fail banks, the interlocking dealing, the multi-trillion-dollar business in derivatives has just shifted from house mortgages to auto loans to student loans. The same game is being played. It's being played by fewer players who are bigger. The big banks that we had that were too big to fail before, they're too bigger to fail now than they were before. And so the fragility of our financial system is an enormous peril to the economy as a whole. The economy is struggling. It's not doing well because businesses are returning, Standard & Poor businesses are returning 91% of their profits to their shareholders, and they're investing 9% in growth, in innovation, and R&D, and worker training, and all the things that make
it used to be pretty much
50-50. It was 50, almost 50-50. It was 53-47, study out in the Harvard Business Review. Unbelievable. We're neither paying our workers well enough to have the consumer demand to drive the economy, nor are we investing enough in our own companies to grow them and be globally competitive. If you have that struggling economy hampered by a fragile financial system that hasn't dealt with the too big to fail problem, it's hard to see how it's not going to happen badly.
How do we deal with? Last night I was debating a couple of conservatives on television, and one of them was going off on the Community Reinvestment Act, right? Community Reinvestment Act. That's why Wall Street crashed, because Jimmy Carter forced banks to give loans to people who didn't even have jobs. Well, you and I know that that's simply a lie. But it is a lie that is believed by virtually everybody who watches Fox News. How do we wake people up to the economic and political realities of this country?
Well, first of all, just keep talking about them. But I think again, taking the problems down to a level where it's close enough to people where they can see that there's a difference. That's why I go to the state. I have to say, Tom, I've pretty much given up on the federal level personally. Yeah. People need to be able to see that if they do something, if they get involved in politics, if they push for an intelligent education program in Minnesota, a program to attract outside businesses to come, to educate kids at community college in the technical skills that are needed in most businesses today, to graduate enough engineers so you have high-tech companies come, to have tax credits that will encourage manufacturing to revive, to reach out into new green energy areas. People have to see that doing that is, A, doable, and that it makes a difference somewhere close to home. Part of the problem is Democrats at the national level have talked about how all these things will work, and people haven't seen it happen enough close enough to home. There are not enough people who've actually seen the delivery of a change in their own lives. So they're now suspicious of the people who say government can actually make a difference, and they're listening more to the people who say, well, it's all private enterprise. Well, you and I know that if you take an Apple phone and you look at its touchstone system and you look at its GPS and you look at a number of other key technologies there, they were all funded by government-backed programs in DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency.
Sure.
The government was the innovator. People don't know that, but somehow it's got to be brought close enough to home where people can see that it makes a difference. People have to feel reconnected again to the process of policy making, and I think they feel totally disconnected.
A lot of these organizations, Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org, MoveToAmend.org, democracyforamerica.com, Jim Dean's organization. A lot of these organizations are just very, very heavily going into local chapters. You can create a local chapter, get people together in your home, do local activity. That's the sort of thing you're talking about?
I hope you're right. I get an awful lot of emails saying, would you click on this petition and we're going to persuade Congress? I don't buy that.
Yeah, I
it's
don't
not
either.
going to happen.
Those are just ways to gather email lists that they can sell.
I don't see that many organizations moving locally, but there are some. Represent Us is one. Washington Men, there are several.
WAMEND.org. They call it a program every Friday.
Yeah.
Hedrick Smith. The website is reclaimtheamericandream.org. The book, Who Stole the American Dream. Hedrick, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Tom. Always fun to talk to you.